The Old Testament can be broken down into several main sections: the Torah, or the Pentateuch, the historical books, the prophets, the Psalms, and the books of wisdom. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It really is the heart of the Old Testament. It contains the 2 stories which form the foundation for the whole Bible, the 2 stories that are referenced over and over and over again: the stories of creation and the Exodus. The story of creation tells us that God made everything that is, and that God still has a hand in the ongoing acts of creation that are all around us. The creation tells us that every single human being is created in God's image. The story of the Exodus is a story of liberation and freedom. It tells us that God hears us when we are in desperate need. It tells us that God is deeply concerned with oppression and injustice, and that God will always rise up and save the persecuted. The historical books are kind of exactly what they sound like: books of history. But it's not just bland history. It's the story of God and God's people. The history begins with the people of God recently rescued from Egypt and having been given a new land. It goes through the stories of how they lived and organized themselves and how they dealt with crises. It tells the story of how sometimes God's people were faithful and how sometimes we weren't. The books of the prophets primarily deal with the times that God's people were not faithful. Sometimes prophecy gets confused with foretelling the future, but that's not what biblical prophecy is all about. Prophets were people who God spoke to, and who in turn were meant to convey the message to everyone else. They were sort of a go-between between God and the people. When the people of God had fallen off the path that God had in store for them, God would tell the prophet to tell the people to knock it off and to start living right. The Psalms are a collection of 150 poems or hymns that were sung at various times in ancient Israel. Sometimes the Psalms feel really relevant to what is going on in our lives today, and sometimes not so much. But Jesus was intimately familiar with the Psalms. In the Gospels, we find Jesus quoting from the Psalms all the time. The Psalms were Jesus' prayer book. The wisdom writings are the book of Job, the Song of Solomon, and Proverbs. And really, they are all about having people interpret their own lives in the light of who our God is.